The dust devil swirling across the western horizon looked like death itself, and Lydia Randall stood on her porch with a rifle in her hands, knowing that what approached was far more dangerous than any wind. The year was 1878, and the Nebraska plains stretched endlessly around her homestead. Golden wheat fields rippling under the August sun like an ocean she had learned to navigate alone since Thomas died 6 months ago. She could see the riders now, 3 of them, and she recognized the lead horse as belonging to Marcus Thornton, the banker from town who had been circling her property like a vulture ever since her husband's funeral. Her hands tightened on the Winchester as the men drew closer, their horses kicking up clouds of red dust that stained the air. Lydia was 24 years old, too young to be a widow, too stubborn to give up the 160 acres that she and Thomas had claimed under the Homestead Act 3 years ago. They had built this life from nothing, surviving droughts and grasshopper plagues, brutal winters and blazing summers, and she would be damned if she let some banker take it from her now. "Mrs. Randall," Marcus Thornton called out as he reined in his horse 20 feet from her porch. He was a portly man with a thick mustache and cold eyes that reminded her of a snake. "I hope you have considered my offer." "I have," Lydia said, keeping the rifle pointed at the ground but visible enough to make her position clear. "And my answer is still no. This land is not for sale." Thornton sighed dramatically, removing his hat and wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Mrs. Randall, please be reasonable. A woman alone cannot possibly manage this property. The mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks, and we both know you cannot make it. Why not sell now while you can still walk away with something?" "Because this is my home," Lydia said firmly. "My husband is buried on that hill. I have a garden, chickens, and 50 head of cattle. I can make the payment." One of the men with Thornton laughed, a harsh sound that made Lydia's jaw clench. 50 head. Lady, we were out here yesterday counting. You have got maybe 35 at most, and half of them look ready to drop dead. You were on my property without permission." Lydia felt her anger rising, hot and sharp in her chest. "Now, Mrs. Randall," Thornton said smoothly, "let us not make this difficult. You have until the 15th of the month. If you cannot pay, the bank will foreclose and you will lose everything anyway. At least my offer gives you something to start over with elsewhere." "Get off my land," Lydia said, raising the rifle now, sighting down the barrel at Thornton's chest. "And do not come back unless you want to see how well I can shoot." For a moment, tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Thornton smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Very well, Mrs. Randall, we will see you on the 15th. He turned his horse and rode away, his companions following, but Lydia knew this was far from over. She stood on the porch long after they disappeared, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, painting everything golden and red. The loneliness hit her then, as it often did in these quiet moments, a physical ache in her chest where Thomas used to be. They had been so young when they married, both 18 and full of dreams about building something lasting in this wild country. Now he was gone, taken by a fever that had burned through him in 3 days, and she was alone with those dreams turned to lead weights around her neck. The sound of another horse approaching made her lift the rifle again, but this time it was a single rider, coming slowly from the east. As he drew closer, Lydia could see he was a tall man on a rangy buckskin horse, wearing a worn hat and dusty clothes that marked him as someone who spent his life in the saddle. He stopped at a respectful distance and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep and carrying easily across the evening air. "I do not mean to intrude. I saw those men leaving and wanted to make sure everything was all right." Lydia studied him carefully. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. There was something honest in his expression, an openness in his blue eyes that made her lower the rifle slightly. "I can handle my own affairs," she said, but her voice was less harsh than it had been with Thornton. "I am sure you can," the man said, a slight smile touching his lips. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I have been working at the Richardson Ranch about 15 miles east of here, but I am looking for a change. I heard in town that you might need a hand." "Who told you that?" Lydia asked suspiciously. "The general store owner, Mr. Peterson. He mentioned you were managing this place alone and that you have been trying to get your cattle rounded up before the payment deadline. I am good with cattle, madam. Good with horses, too. I can mend fences, fix roofs, and I work hard for fair wages." Lydia wanted to say no immediately. Having a stranger on her property, especially a man, would set tongues wagging in town. But the truth was she desperately needed help. The cattle had scattered across her range, and she had been trying to round them up alone for weeks with little success. Some had probably wandered onto neighboring properties, and she needed every head accounted for if she was going to sell enough to make her payment. "I cannot pay much," she said finally. "Room and board in the barn, and whatever I can spare after I sell the cattle." Daniel Hayes nodded, swinging down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "That sounds fair to me, madam. When do we start?" "Dawn," Lydia said. "And Mr. Hayes, I sleep with this rifle next to my bed. If you try anything, I will not hesitate to use it." "Understood, madam," he said seriously, no hint of offense in his voice. "I give you my word I will conduct myself with honor." There was something about the way he said it that made Lydia believe him. She showed him to the barn, which was sturdy and clean, with fresh hay in the loft and a small room at the back where Thomas had sometimes slept during calving season. Daniel thanked her politely and set about settling his horse for the night while Lydia returned to the house. She made herself a simple supper of beans and cornbread, sitting at the table that suddenly felt too large and empty. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn and the shadow of Daniel moving around inside. She wondered if she had made a mistake, trusting a stranger, but something in her gut told her that Daniel Hayes was different from the men she usually encountered. Time would tell if her instincts were right. The next morning, Lydia woke before dawn as was her habit, dressing quickly in her split riding skirt and a practical cotton blouse. She had inherited Thomas's clothes, but could not bring herself to wear them, so she made do with what she had, tucking her long dark hair under a wide-brimmed hat to keep the sun off her face. When she stepped outside, she found Daniel already up, standing by the corral with 2 horses saddled and ready. "Figured we would want an early start," he said simply, handing her the reins to her mare, a sturdy sorrel named Rosie. They rode out as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and gold. Daniel proved to be a man of few words but much skill, spotting cattle tracks that Lydia would have missed and reading the land with the ease of someone born to it. By mid-morning, they had found a group of 7 cattle grazing in a ravine 3 miles from the house and hazed them back toward the main herd. As they worked, Lydia found herself stealing glances at Daniel. He sat his horse like he was part of it, moving with an unconscious grace that came from years of practice. When he spoke to the cattle, his voice was low and soothing, and even the most skittish animals seemed to calm under his handling. There was a patience to him, a quiet confidence that she found oddly reassuring. "You have done this before," she observed during a brief rest in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Daniel took a long drink from his canteen before answering. "Been working cattle since I was 14. My father had a ranch down in Texas, but he lost it after the war. I have been drifting north ever since, working where I can find it." "The war," Lydia repeated softly. The Civil War had ended 13 years ago, but its shadows still stretched long across the country. "You served." "Too young," Daniel said, "but my older brother did. He did not come back." There was a weight to his words, an old grief that Lydia recognized all too well. "My father fought for the Union," she said. "He came back, but he was different, angry all the time. He died when I was 16. They sat in silence for a moment, two people shaped by loss, and Lydia felt an unexpected kinship with this quiet cowboy. He did not press her with questions or pry into her life, and she appreciated that more than she could say. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, working until sunset, with brief breaks for meals that Lydia brought out to the range in a basket. Daniel was true to his word, working harder than any man she had ever seen, and slowly but surely they rounded up the scattered cattle. Lydia kept a careful count, marking each animal in a ledger book she carried in her saddlebag. One afternoon, as they were driving a stubborn group of heifers back toward the main pasture, Daniel's horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole. He reacted instantly, throwing his weight forward to keep the horse from going down completely, but the animal still went to its knees. Daniel rolled clear, landing hard on the ground with a grunt of pain. "Are you all right?" Lydia called out, already swinging down from Rosie and hurrying over. "Fine," Daniel said, but when he tried to stand, his left leg buckled beneath him. Lydia caught his arm, steadying him, and felt the solid warmth of his body against hers. For a moment they were very close, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes and smell the honest sweat and leather scent of him. "You are not fine," she said firmly, pushing aside the strange flutter in her chest. "Sit down and let me look at your leg." "It is just twisted," Daniel protested, but he let her help him to a flat rock. She knelt beside him, her hands surprisingly steady as she examined his ankle. It was already starting to swell, but when she pressed gently, nothing felt broken. "Can you move it?" she asked. Daniel rotated his foot slowly, wincing but managing the full range of motion. "See, just twisted. I will be fine by tomorrow." "We should head back anyway," Lydia said. "It is getting late and I need to wrap that ankle properly." They rode back slowly, Daniel refusing any help mounting his horse despite the obvious pain he was in. Back at the house, Lydia made him sit at the kitchen table while she fetched cold water from the well and cleaned strips of cloth. As she wrapped his ankle, her fingers brushing against his skin, she was acutely aware of the intimacy of the act, of being alone in her house with a man who was not her husband. "Thank you," Daniel said softly when she finished. "You did not have to do all this." "You work for me," Lydia said, standing and busying herself with preparing supper to hide her confusion. "I cannot have my only help laid up with an injury because I did not tend to it properly." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Over the past week, something had shifted between them, a growing respect that was becoming something warmer, something Lydia was not ready to name. She had loved Thomas, loved him with the whole heart of a girl becoming a woman, and the thought of feeling anything for another man seemed like a betrayal of his memory. Daniel stayed in the house that night, sleeping on the floor by the fireplace at Lydia's insistence. She lay awake in her bedroom, listening to his quiet breathing, and wondered what she was doing. But when morning came and she found him already up, trying to work despite his injured ankle, she felt a surge of exasperation and something else, something tender that she ruthlessly pushed down. "You are supposed to rest that leg," she said sharply. "We do not have time for me to rest," Daniel replied, hobbling toward the door. "We still have at least 20 head out there, and you have got less than a week until your payment is due." He was right, and Lydia hated that he was right. They worked that day, Daniel moving more slowly but refusing to quit, and by evening they had found another 8 cattle. Lydia updated her count in the ledger, 43 head total. It was not enough. She needed at least 50 to make the payment, maybe more depending on the prices at market. That night, sitting at the table while Daniel soaked his ankle in cold water, Lydia finally voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her. "I do not think we are going to make it." Daniel looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "How much do you need?" $300 for the payment, plus another 50 for supplies to get through winter. I can probably get $6 a head for the cattle, maybe $7 if the market is good. That gives me about $300 at best, with nothing left over. "What about your wheat?" Daniel asked. Lydia shook her head. "Most of it burned in that dry spell in July. I have maybe 10 acres worth harvesting, and that will barely cover feed for the animals through winter." They sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Then Daniel said quietly, "I have some money saved. Not much, but maybe $60. You can have it." "What?" Lydia stared at him in shock. "No, absolutely not. I cannot take your savings." "Why not?" Daniel met her eyes steadily. "You need it and I do not. I can always earn more." "But why would you do that?" Lydia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "You barely know me." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I know what it is like to lose everything. Because I see how hard you fight for this place, and I admire that. And because—" He trailed off, looking away. "Because I want to help." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Lydia wiped at her eyes, frustrated with herself for crying. "I cannot take your money as a gift, but maybe we can make a deal. If I can keep this place, you stay on as my foreman. I will pay you fair wages once I get back on my feet." "Deal," Daniel said, extending his hand. Lydia shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, and something shifted between them again, settling into place like a door opening onto new possibilities. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. They worked from before dawn until after dark, scouring every corner of Lydia's range for cattle. Daniel's ankle was better, though he still limped slightly, and together they found another 6 head, bringing the total to 49. Close, so close, but still one short of the number Lydia wanted. On the morning of the 14th, the day before the payment was due, they rode out one last time. The weather had turned, dark clouds rolling in from the west, and the air smelled like rain. They searched the western section of Lydia's property, an area thick with scrub brush and rocky outcroppings where cattle sometimes sheltered. It was Daniel who spotted them, 3 cows and a calf tucked into a small canyon that Lydia had not even known existed on her own land. The cows were wild-eyed and spooky, clearly having been on their own for weeks, and getting them out of the canyon was going to be difficult. "I will go in on foot," Daniel said, already swinging down from his horse. "Push them toward the opening, and you haze them back toward the house once they come through." "Be careful," Lydia said, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern. Daniel flashed her a quick grin, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Always am." He disappeared into the canyon, and Lydia positioned herself at the opening, watching the dark sky and hoping the rain would hold off. She could hear Daniel's voice echoing off the stone walls, low and steady as he worked the cattle. Then suddenly there was a clatter of hooves, and the 3 cows burst out of the canyon at a dead run, the calf struggling to keep up. Lydia spurred Rosie forward, cutting off the lead cow and turning her back toward the east. The cattle were scared and running wild, and it took all of her skill to keep them together and moving in the right direction. She was so focused on the cattle that she did not see Daniel emerge from the canyon, limping badly, until she circled back to check on him. "What happened?" she called out, riding up beside him. "Stepped wrong on some loose rock," Daniel said through gritted teeth. "Same damn ankle, but I am fine. Let us get these cattle home." It started to rain as they hazed the animals back toward the house, a light drizzle at first that quickly turned into a downpour. They were both soaked through by the time they got the cattle into the main pasture, and Daniel was moving like every step cost him. Lydia practically forced him into the house, making him sit by the fire while she fetched dry clothes and more bandages. This time, when she wrapped his ankle, he did not protest. He sat very still, watching her face as she worked, and Lydia could feel the weight of his gaze on her. When she finished and looked up, their eyes met, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "Lydia," Daniel said softly, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." "Wait," Lydia said, suddenly afraid of what he might say, of how she might respond. "Not yet. Tomorrow, after we make the payment, after we know for sure that we saved this place, then you can tell me whatever you need to say." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Tomorrow, then." That night, Lydia lay in bed listening to the rain hammer against the roof and thinking about the man sleeping in her house. She was 24 years old, a widow, fighting to keep the only home she had ever made for herself. She should not be thinking about Daniel Hayes, about his steady hands and quiet strength, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious. But she was thinking about him, had been thinking about him more and more each day, and it terrified her. She had loved Thomas, would always love him in a way, but he had been a boy when they married, and she had been a girl. They had grown up together, learning how to be adults in the harsh reality of frontier life. What she felt stirring in her chest when she looked at Daniel was different. An adult attraction born of respect and admiration, and something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with girlish dreams and everything to do with the woman she had become through loss and hardship. Morning came gray and damp, the rain having passed in the night but leaving everything wet and muddy. Lydia made breakfast for both of them, and they ate in comfortable silence. Then they spent the morning doing a final count of the cattle, making absolutely sure of their numbers. 52 head total, including the calf. It was enough. By noon they were on the road to town, riding side by side with the cattle strung out in a long line behind them. The journey took most of the afternoon, and the sun was already low in the sky when they finally drove the herd into the stockyards on the edge of town. The cattle buyer was a gruff man named Harrison who looked over the animals with a critical eye. $6 a head, he said finally. "They are a bit rough, but they will fatten up." "These are prime cattle," Lydia said firmly. $7 a head. 6.5, Harrison countered. "And that is as high as I go." Lydia looked at Daniel, who gave her a small nod. "Done," she said, and they shook on it. Harrison paid her in cash, counting out the bills with slow deliberation. $338, more than enough for the payment with some left over for winter supplies. Lydia felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy, and when she looked at Daniel, she saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. They left the cattle in Harrison's care and rode to the bank, arriving just before closing time. Marcus Thornton was behind his desk, and his face fell when he saw Lydia walk in. "Mrs. Randall," he said, his voice tight, "I did not expect to see you." "I am here to make my payment," Lydia said, placing the money on his desk. $300 as agreed. Thornton counted the bills twice, clearly hoping to find some excuse to reject the payment, but the money was all there. Finally, he produced a receipt and stamped it with obvious reluctance. Your account is current, Mrs. Randall, until the next payment in 6 months. I will be here, Lydia said, taking the receipt and folding it carefully. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back. And Mr. Thornton, if I ever catch anyone from your bank on my property without permission again, I will have the sheriff arrest them for trespassing. She walked out with her head high, Daniel following behind her, and she did not look back. Outside in the gathering dusk, she suddenly felt all the tension of the past weeks drain out of her, leaving her shaking and euphoric. She had done it. Against all odds, she had kept her home. We should celebrate, Daniel said, gesturing toward the hotel restaurant across the street. Let me buy you dinner. Lydia wanted to say no to maintain the proper distance between employer and employee, but she was tired of being proper, tired of being alone. All right, she said, and the smile that spread across Daniel's face made her heart skip a beat. The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps casting warm light. They ordered steak and potatoes, and while they waited for the food, Lydia found herself relaxing for the first time in months. She told Daniel about how she and Thomas had met, about their dreams for the homestead, about the plans they had made before fever took him away. He sounds like he was a good man, Daniel said softly. He was, Lydia agreed. I loved him very much, but he is gone now and I am still here and I have to figure out how to keep living. You are doing that, Daniel said, better than most people could. Their food arrived and they ate in companionable silence for a while. Then Daniel said, I told you I had something to tell you. Do you still want to hear it? Lydia's heart started beating faster, but she nodded. Yes. Daniel set down his fork, his expression serious. I have been drifting for a long time, Lydia. Ever since my family lost everything, I have not had a place that felt like home. I told myself I liked it that way, like being free to move on whenever I wanted. But these past 2 weeks, working with you, being on your land, I realized something. I do not want to drift anymore. He paused and Lydia held her breath, waiting. I want to stay, Daniel continued. Not just as your foreman, though I will be that if it is all you want, but I am hoping maybe that it could be something more. I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving and I am not asking you to make any decisions right now. I just wanted you to know that I care about you, Lydia. More than I probably should, given how short a time we have known each other. But I do, and I thought you should know. Lydia stared at him, her mind whirling. She should tell him it was inappropriate, that she was not ready, that he was right about it being too soon. But the words that came out of her mouth were different. I care about you too, that scares me. Why? Daniel asked gently. Because what if something happens to you? Lydia said, the fear finally voiced. What if I let myself care and then you leave or you get hurt or you die and I have to go through all that pain again? I do not know if I am strong enough for that. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I cannot promise that nothing will ever happen to me, Lydia. None of us can promise that. But I can promise that I will fight like hell to stay here with you for as long as you will have me. And I think you are a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. Lydia felt tears welling up, but this time they were not tears of grief. I do not know how to do this, she whispered, how to care about someone new. We will figure it out together, Daniel said. No rush, no pressure. We will just take it one day at a time. They finished their meal talking about safer things, about Daniel's plans for improving the cattle operation and Lydia's ideas for expanding the wheat fields next spring. But something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be ignored. When they rode back to the homestead that night, under a sky full of stars, Lydia felt lighter than she had in months. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Daniel stayed on as foreman, sleeping in the barn and working the ranch with a dedication that impressed Lydia more each day. But now there were also quiet moments stolen between work, conversations that stretched long into the evening, and looks that said more than words ever could. Lydia found herself thinking about Daniel constantly, noticing small things like the way he smiled when he was amused, the careful way he handled the horses, the patience he showed with everything he did. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her, with a warmth and respect that made her feel valued in ways she had almost forgotten. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel said, "Tell me about your dreams, Lydia. Not the ones you had with Thomas, but the ones that are just yours." Lydia thought about it for a long moment. "I want this place to thrive," she said finally. "I want to build it into something that will last, something I can be proud of. I want to prove that a woman can run a successful ranch. And I want—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "What?" Daniel prompted gently. "I want to not be alone anymore," Lydia admitted. "I thought I could do everything by myself, and I can if I have to, but I am tired of having to. I want someone to share this life with." "You have that," Daniel said quietly, "if you want it." Lydia turned to look at him, this man who had come into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. He was not Thomas, would never be Thomas, but maybe that was all right. Maybe she was allowed to have a different kind of love, one built on mutual respect and shared struggles, and the daily choice to stay and build something together. "I want it," she said, and Daniel's face lit up with a joy that took her breath away. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Lydia did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, and when his lips touched hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Lydia was smiling. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," Daniel admitted, his voice rough. "Me too," Lydia said, surprising herself with the truth of it. They courted properly after that, despite already living on the same property. Daniel would call at the house in the evenings, hat in hand, and ask permission to take Lydia for a walk around the property. They talked about everything, learning each other's stories, dreams, and fears. Daniel told her about growing up in Texas, about his family's struggles during Reconstruction, about the brother he had lost and the father who had died broken and bitter. Lydia told him about her own childhood, about parents who had never quite understood her stubborn independence, about meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 17. "You ever feel guilty?" Lydia asked one night as they sat under the stars, "for being happy after losing someone?" "Every day," Daniel admitted. "But I think my brother would want me to be happy. I think he would be glad I found someone like you." "I think Thomas would too," Lydia said softly. "He was always telling me I needed to live more, worry less. I think he would like you." As autumn deepened into winter, they worked together to prepare the ranch for the harsh Nebraska cold. Daniel proved his worth 100 times over, fixing the barn roof, reinforcing fences, and hunting to supplement their food stores. He also proved himself in smaller ways, bringing Lydia coffee in the morning, listening when she needed to talk, and giving her space when she needed to be alone with her memories. In November, Daniel made a trip to town and came back with a small package. That evening, he asked Lydia to walk with him to the hill where Thomas was buried. She had been afraid it would feel wrong, bringing Daniel to that place, but instead it felt right, like she was introducing two important parts of her life. "I wanted to ask permission," Daniel said quietly, standing beside the simple wooden cross that marked Thomas's grave. "I know that might sound strange, but I respect what you had with him, and I want to do this right." "Ask permission for what?" Lydia asked, though her heart was already racing. Daniel turned to her, pulling the small package from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band. To marry you, to spend the rest of my life helping you build this ranch into everything you dream it can be, to stand beside you through whatever comes, good or bad. I love you, Lydia Randall, and I want to be your husband if you will have me. Lydia looked at the ring, then at Daniel's face, then up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. She thought about Thomas, about the girl she had been when she married him, and about the woman she had become through loss and hardship. She thought about Daniel, about his quiet strength and steadfast loyalty, about the way he made her feel safe and challenged and cherished all at once. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, holding her close while the wind whispered across the plains. When they finally pulled apart, Lydia felt Thomas's presence around them, not sad or angry but peaceful, as if he was giving them his blessing. They were married in December, in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Mr. Peterson from the general store stood up with Daniel, and Mrs. Peterson stood with Lydia, and afterward there was a small celebration at the hotel with the few people Lydia had come to call friends in this frontier town. Even Marcus Thornton attended, though he left early and without congratulating the bride and groom. That night, Lydia and Daniel returned to the homestead as husband and wife. Daniel had spent the previous week moving his things from the barn to the house, though he had not presumed to share Lydia's bed until they were properly married. Now, standing in the bedroom that had been hers alone for so long, Lydia felt a moment of nervousness. "We can take this slow," Daniel said, reading her expression. "There is no rush." "No," Lydia said, reaching for his hand. "I am ready, I want this." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a gentle exploration of each other that left Lydia feeling cherished and whole in ways she had not felt since before Thomas died. Afterward, lying in Daniel's arms, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had not forgotten Thomas, would never forget him, but she had made room in her heart for Daniel too, and that felt like exactly what she was supposed to do. Winter that year was harsh, with storms that buried the ranch in snow and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the well froze solid. But Lydia and Daniel weathered it together, working side by side to keep the animals fed and the house warm. On the worst days, when they were snowed in and could not go outside at all, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours, or Daniel would read aloud from the few books they owned while Lydia worked on her sewing. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Lydia said one evening, watching the firelight play across Daniel's face as he read. He looked up, setting the book aside, and pulled her close. "Neither did I, but here we are." Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it came new challenges and new opportunities. They planted more wheat, adding another 20 acres to what Lydia had cultivated before. Daniel traded work with a neighboring rancher and came home with 10 young cattle that would form the foundation of a new herd. They were building something together, something that belonged to both of them, and Lydia felt her dreams expanding to include futures she had never imagined. In May, Lydia realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or the hard work of spring planting, but when 2 months passed, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She told Daniel that evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions so quickly that Lydia almost laughed. Shock, joy, fear, and finally settling on pure happiness. "A baby," he repeated as if testing out the word. "Lydia, that is wonderful. How are you feeling? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Lydia assured him, touched by his immediate concern. "A little sick in the mornings, but nothing I cannot handle." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "Are you happy about it?" Lydia asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Daniel said, pulling back to look at her face. "I love you, Lydia. And I already love this baby we made together. I promise I will be the best father I know how to be." "I know you will," Lydia said, and she did know it, with the same certainty that had led her to marry him. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Lydia continued to work, though Daniel became increasingly protective, trying to stop her from doing anything too strenuous. They compromised, with Lydia handling the lighter work and Daniel taking on the heavier tasks. The garden flourished under her care, and the wheat fields grew tall and golden, promising a good harvest. In August, they received unexpected visitors. A well-dressed couple arrived in a fancy carriage, introducing themselves as Thomas's parents. Lydia had not seen them since the funeral, had not even known they knew where she lived now. Mrs. Rowland looked at the homestead with barely concealed disdain, taking in the simple house and rough outbuildings. "Lydia, dear," she said with false sweetness, "we heard you had remarried. We wanted to come see how you were doing and to speak with you about something important." Lydia invited them in, serving coffee while Daniel stood quietly in the corner, his presence a solid reassurance. Mr. Rowland got straight to the point. "We understand you are expecting a child. We want to make you an offer for the property. A very generous offer. You could move back east, closer to civilization, and raise your family in comfort." "This is my home," Lydia said firmly. "I am not selling." "But surely you see that this is no place to raise a child," Mrs. Rowland said. "The dangers, the isolation, the hard work. Why would you choose to struggle here when you could have so much more?" "Because this is the life I want," Lydia said, her voice hard. "Thomas and I built this place together, and now Daniel and I are making it even better. My child will grow up knowing the value of hard work and the beauty of this land. That is worth more than any comfort you could offer." The Rowlands left shortly after, clearly disappointed, but Lydia felt no regret. She had made her choice, had built this life with her own hands, and she was not going to give it up for anyone. The baby came in January, during one of the coldest winters Nebraska had seen in years. Mrs. Peterson came out to help with the birth, and after a long night of labor, Lydia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Daniel wept when he held his son for the first time, and Lydia felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. They named him Thomas Daniel Hayes, honoring both the man who had come before and the man who was raising him. Little Thomas was a hungry, loud baby who demanded attention at all hours, but Lydia had never been happier. She would wake in the night to feed him and find Daniel awake too, watching them both with an expression of such love that it took her breath away. "I never knew life could be like this," Daniel said one night, as they both sat exhausted after finally getting Thomas back to sleep. "Like what?" Lydia asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Full," Daniel said simply. "Before, I was just existing, just going through the motions. But now, with you and Thomas, I feel like I am actually living." "Me too," Lydia said softly. "I thought my life was over when Thomas died, that I would never feel whole again. But I was wrong. I am whole, just in a different way than I was before." The years passed quickly after that, measured in seasons and harvests and the milestones of their growing family. When Thomas was 2, Lydia gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. 2 years after that came another boy, William, who was quieter than his siblings but no less loved. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Daniel proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, building their herd into one of the finest in the county. Lydia expanded the wheat fields and started a successful chicken operation, selling eggs in town. They hired additional help as the work grew, and Daniel taught the cowboys who worked for them with the same patience he showed his own children. Lydia never forgot Thomas, visiting his grave several times a year with flowers from her garden. She told her children about him, about the young man who had helped her claim this land, and she made sure they understood that it was possible to love more than once, that the heart was bigger than most people realized. By the time Lydia was 40 years old, the homestead had become a thriving ranch covering 300 acres. Thomas was 18 and already taking on more responsibilities, learning the business from his father. Sarah was 16 and showing an unexpected talent for training horses. William was 14 and dreaming of becoming a doctor, though Lydia suspected he would stay closer to home than that. One evening, as Lydia and Daniel sat on the porch watching their children work in the corral, Daniel took her hand. "Do you remember that first day I rode up here? You were standing on this porch with a rifle, looking like you were ready to fight the whole world." "I remember," Lydia said, smiling at the memory. "I thought you were another problem to deal with." "And now?" Daniel asked, though his eyes were twinkling. "Now you are my solution," Lydia said, leaning in to kiss him. "To everything." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. It had not been an easy journey, and there had been hard times along with the good, but Lydia would not change any of it. She had lost her first love and found her second, had fought to keep her home and succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, had built a family and a legacy that would last long after she was gone. Marcus Thornton had died 5 years ago, and his bank had been sold to new owners who treated Lydia and Daniel with the respect they deserved. The mortgage had been paid off 3 years ago, and now the ranch was theirs free and clear. They had money in the bank, healthy children, and most importantly, they had each other. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Lydia thought about the girl she had been, newly widowed and desperate, standing alone against forces that wanted to take everything from her. She thought about the cowboy who had offered to help, asking for nothing in return, and how that simple act of kindness had changed both their lives. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, reading her expression as he always could. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Lydia said honestly. "About how close I came to giving up, and how glad I am that I did not. About how you came into my life at exactly the right moment." "I am the lucky one," Daniel said, pulling her close. "I was drifting through life with no purpose until I found you. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to stay in one place. You gave me everything that matters." They kissed then, a long, sweet kiss that held 20 years of shared history, of struggles overcome and dreams realized. When they pulled apart, their children were watching from the corral, Thomas grinning, Sarah rolling her eyes, and William making exaggerated gagging sounds. "Let them laugh," Daniel said, his arm around Lydia's waist. "Someday they will understand." "Someday," Lydia agreed, but she did not let go of Daniel. She had learned the hard way that life was precious and uncertain, that the people you loved could be taken from you in an instant. So she held on tight to what she had, grateful for every moment, and she watched the stars come out over the land she had refused to abandon, and the family she had built from heartbreak and hope. Years continued to roll by like the seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Thomas eventually married a girl from town, a smart young woman named Elizabeth who was not afraid of hard work. They built a house on the eastern section of the ranch and started their own family, giving Lydia and Daniel their first grandchildren. Sarah shocked everyone by deciding to become a veterinarian, traveling back east to study at one of the few schools that would accept women. William did become a doctor, but true to Lydia's prediction, he opened his practice in the nearest town so he could stay close to the ranch. Through it all, Lydia and Daniel remained the steady heart of their growing family. They aged together, gray appearing in their hair, lines deepening around their eyes and mouths, but their love only grew stronger. They still worked the ranch, though they left more of the heavy labor to younger hands, and they still sat on the porch every evening watching the sunset. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the ranch house. The place was packed with family and friends, with the cowboys who had worked for them over the years and the neighbors who had become like family. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and as Lydia looked around at all the people gathered to celebrate, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech," someone called out, and soon everyone was chanting it. Daniel helped Lydia stand on a chair so everyone could see her. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the family she had built and the community she had become part of, and she smiled. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice still strong despite her years. "When I first came to this land with my first husband Thomas, we had nothing but dreams and determination. When he died, I thought those dreams had died with him. But then Daniel came along, and he showed me that dreams could change, could grow, could become something even better than I had imagined. This ranch, this family, this life we have built together, it is more than I ever hoped for. So thank you, Daniel, for taking a chance on a stubborn widow who would not give up her land. Thank you for loving me, for building this life with me, and for being the best partner I could have asked for." There were tears and cheers, and Daniel pulled her down from the chair into a long kiss that made their grandchildren shriek with laughter. "I love you," he said against her lips. "Then, now, and always." As the party continued into the night, Lydia found herself drawn outside to the porch, to the place where so much of her life had unfolded. Daniel followed, as she knew he would, and they stood together looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. "We did it," Lydia said softly. "We built something that will last." "We did," Daniel agreed, his arm around her waist, "and it is better than anything I could have dreamed of." They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had fought to build a life together and succeeded beyond measure. Behind them, music and laughter spilled out from the house, the sounds of family and happiness. Before them stretched the land they had worked and loved, the legacy they would leave behind. Lydia leaned into Daniel's warmth, feeling safe and cherished and complete. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a frightened widow facing loss to a woman who had rebuilt her life into something beautiful. She thought about the two men who had loved her, each in their own way, each helping her become who she was meant to be. And she thought about the future, about the generations that would come after them, working this land and building their own dreams. The homestead that she had refused to abandon would continue long after she was gone, a testament to stubbornness and love and the unbreakable human spirit. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, a question he had asked her many times over the years. "Not a single one," Lydia said, the same answer she always gave, and she meant it with her whole heart. They went back inside together, back to the party, and the people who loved them, back to the life they had built together one hard day at a time. And in that moment, surrounded by family and standing beside the man who had helped her keep her homestead and had given her his heart too, Lydia Randall Hayes was completely, perfectly happy. The party wound down eventually, with guests departing under a star-filled sky. Their children helped clean up, and then they too went home, leaving Lydia and Daniel alone in the quiet house. They went to bed in the room they had shared for 3 decades, in the house that had sheltered them through storms and seasons, and they held each other close. "Thank you," Lydia whispered in the darkness. "For what?" Daniel asked. "For everything. For seeing me that day and deciding to stop. For helping me save this place. For loving me. For staying." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Daniel said, and Lydia knew he meant it. He always had. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, 2 hearts beating as one, and outside the Nebraska wind whispered across the plains that stretched to the horizon, across the land they had claimed and kept and made into a home,